In this lesson we will cover two effectors that we skipped in the previous lesson. So inheritance and the volume effector. So let's first create a clone setup. I will create a torus and scale it to some reasonable size, maybe like this. I'll add a cloner as a parent, and maybe I will go this time in Z direction, like this. Maybe 10 clones and 100 for value here. Also, I will add this green material that I prepared just to bring some life into this guy. So now let's add an inheritance effector. Nothing will happen by itself because you have to create an object from which these guys will inherit, and they can inherit position, scale, and rotation. So basically they can inherit transformation from other objects. So let's create something they will inherit from. So let's maybe create a null object. We will name it parent. Okay, so it will be a parent of all transformations, and maybe we can give it this standard controller value. So just to have a visual representation viewport and really place it somewhere so we can see it. Now we will drop this parent null, which will drive all the transformations into our object slot in the inheritance effector. So now what happened? The guys snapped, the initial clone snapped to the position of this guy. So if you turn off position, those guys will get back to their initial position. So same goes for maybe rotation and also for scaling, but you have to be in the object mode like this, otherwise it won't work. Let's get back to model mode and let me show you some interesting things regarding this inheritance effector. This guy currently works in direct mode, so it means it will assume and propagate the transformations immediately as they happen with this parent guy. So if I move this, they will follow immediately. Now there is a different mode, and it's animation, and you will get different results. And of course you will get a bunch of different objects. For this mode to work, you obviously have to have some sort of animation. So let's add some animation to this guy and really keep it simple. Maybe we will rotate it by a small amount. So on the frame 0, we will keyframe this bank rotation. Let's go to frame 30 and enter 90 degrees here, and we will add a keyframe. So watch what happens now. If I press play, you will see that these guys are rotating. So they are following this guy, but with a certain delay, and that all happens in this amount of time. If I set this to 30, you will see the immediate rotation of these guys. Let me stop this, because I want to explain you this a little bit more in depth. So here you can define the starting and the end point of the transformation time for these guys. I really hope that makes sense. So let's actually add some time here. So let's maybe add 300. We'll do the same here, and I will right click and do an expand to full time. Let's go back and press play. Now you will see that these guys are rotating, and once they finish, they simply stop. If you enable this loop like this, then that behavior will loop. Okay, I think that is really simple to understand. Now there is a really interesting option here, which is a step gap. So you will basically create a step which will take place in between each clone. So let's maybe set this to 2 and press play, and you will see the results. So there are basically, maybe I will turn off this loop so it will be easier to understand. Let's go back to 90 frames you will see the effect. So now the rotation is propagating gradually through these clones. If you change this value, this end value, you're basically controlling the speed, so something like this. And this inheritance effector is absolutely great and can create spectacular results. Of course, it also offers all standard things that you can expect from the effector, and you can see you can affect position, scale, or rotation, so you can maybe turn off something. You have a deformation option and a good old fall off, so lots of possibilities there. So you could have fun with this and maybe add say a delay effector. And now the effect, let's set this to maybe spring and increase this to, let's say, 75. And now you can create really this springy motion throughout these clones. Imagine doing this by hand. This is simply a nightmare. Even if it would be possible to get decent results, the sheer setup time would really consume all of your time. With these effectors and a bunch of generating objects in MoGraph, the possibilities are pretty much endless, so you can even play with this strength, so only partial influence will be propagated, something like this, so lots of flexibility there. I think that this is one of my favorite effectors. And this is not all it can do. It can morph between objects. So let me show you that. I will get rid of this delay effector. Also this parent null. We will put these clones in a y value, let's say 50, something like this. So we have a sort of a stack of clones. We will copy this setup, but we will use another object instead of this torus. So let's say maybe let's go with the cone, and we will scale that cone a bit, something like this. Drop it here, and it's a really good idea to name these guys. So we will rename these cones. I will go up the hierarchy and rename these toruses. Hey, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Now let's move one of these guys, and because I want to show you how this inheritance effector can really morph transformation values between the various cloners or other generator objects. Okay, so currently our torus's cloner has this inheritance effector loaded. That means that it will inherit transformations from the object loaded here. So let's set this first to direct, and we will drop our cones cloner inside. So now you will see that those toruses simply snap to the position of those cones. So you can clearly see this if I will play with the strength. We can make this a little bit more interesting, and I will add a simple time effector to our clones. So I'll just change the value, so let's say here 90 degrees, and our cones will rotate. Let me go back, and currently nothing will happen unless we enable this morph motion object. So you can see now that those objects, those toruses, even though they don't have the time effector, they're rotating. So for example, if we turn off position in inheritance, only inherited value will be a rotation. So I really hope that makes sense and it's clear enough. So it's really used to transform position, scale, and rotation values, and also to morph between generators. I believe we can go even a step further with this. Let's in fact delete all these guys except one cloner. Maybe we will scale this, and we'll create two additional objects so we can explain this better. Let me create a cube. I'll move it here, maybe add, let's say, a few subdivisions to it, maybe even more. Let's go with 3. And also I will create a sphere and move it, let's say, here. This generator, this cloner, can be left in the middle. I will also enable gradient shading lines so we can see the wireframes. And I will set this cloner to be in the object mode. So we will clone to one of these objects. So let's select maybe a sphere, and you'll see that these little guys, maybe we will scale it just a little bit smaller so much more easier to see what is going on. And I will add an inheritance effector to these cones like this. And for this to work, we have to have another generator. So we have to create another cloner, or maybe we could even create a matrix guy. This would be a really good example where we could use matrix just to get position, scaling, and rotation information instead of these guys. So let's get rid of this cube. So you can also use a matrix to ease up the setup, so it really won't be demanding as far as the processing power goes. So now in my inheritance effector, I will drop this matrix object, and you will see something happening. And if I enable this morph motion object, you will see that these guys, these little cones, assumed the positions of these matrices here. I can even turn off the visibility of these matrices so they are really not in the way, and I will turn on gradient shading so these guys are easier to see. In the inheritance effector, with the strength slider, you are simply defining where these guys will end up. So at 100% they are at 1 generator, and at 0% they are at their original generating object. This is absolutely fantastic, and things you can do with this are completely mind-blowing. So you can morph the clone constellations to anything you wish. You can use matrices, cloners, you can clone on your own objects or anything that pops to your mind. At this moment, you certainly can visualize what kind of tools MoGraph has in its arsenal, and how it is much more than a fancy motion graphics tool. Let me add this strength slider in the viewport. So right click, add to HUD. I'll control drag it here, and right click and do a show always. So I really don't have to select this guy. If I want to play with the slider, it will be accessible here all the time. I will now add a second effector to this setup, and that is this volume effector. So we will select our original cloner object and select volume effector. Now for this guy to work, you can see it has completely the same settings as other effectors. So these are pretty much common, and here for this guy to work, you have to have a closed volume object, and that must be polygon object. So let's create one. Maybe we will go with the torus. I will just rotate it and maybe scale it down a bit, something like this. Maybe even pull it here, so roughly in the middle between those two guys. I will convert it, and let's do something interesting with it. So while this transfer is occurring, I want these clones to be affected with this volume object that we created for our volume effector. So let's drop the torus inside and see what happens. And pretty much nothing will happen because you have to define some parameters here. So let's maybe define the scale. Let's put 1 here, or maybe even 2, it will be easier to see. So now take a closer look. Once they hit the volume of the object, those guys become bigger. I hope that you can see that. And of course, it all works parametric in MoGraph, so the setups are non-destructible, and you can hide the volume object and you will see the effect now really clear. So I'm transferring little cones from this sphere. They're traveling, they're becoming bigger in a certain moment, and they're forming a grid cube. How about that? That is just a glimpse of what MoGraph can do. To do this in another 3D package, well, you would most certainly have to be really good with programming or some scripting language or something like that. So MoGraph gives you a power to do that without that knowledge. So that is simply awesome. Let's now take a look at other MoGraph generators here under this MoGraph menu in our next lesson.